This.Labs. My name is Sarah Renaud with This.Labs, and I will be your host today. We're wrapping up this marathon with building GraphQL resolvers. Today's trainer is Josh Oppenheim, Senior Software Engineer at This.Inc. Welcome, Josh.
Thanks.
You can find Josh on Twitter using the handle shown at the bottom of the screen. Please don't hesitate to get in touch if you have any questions or feedback. And of course, we couldn't do this without our sponsors. Our sponsor today is This.Labs, your partners in modern digital transformation, specializing in mentorship, consulting, training, and staff augmentation for enterprise organizations. Find out more at this.labs.com or send us an email at hi@this.co. Do you find keeping up with the constantly evolving technologies a struggle? Do you want to bring your team up to speed on one of the latest technologies? This.Labs offers personalized training programs to suit your organizational needs, ensuring you and your company stay on the leading edge. Contact us today at hi@this.co to set up your complimentary needs assessment. Of course, we have a ton of exciting upcoming events happening. Check out our global meetups in Angular, GraphQL, React, and Vue. More details are available at this.co. And we are back next month. JavaScript Marathon returns Wednesday, December 9th. Stay tuned for more details. And with that, I will pass it on over to Josh.
Thanks, Sarah. Well, welcome, everybody. My name is Josh again. I'm a senior engineer at This.Labs, and I want to talk about GraphQL resolvers today. So we're going to go over a little bit about the plan today is to go through a little bit of an overview of what GraphQL is, talk about the philosophy behind it a little bit, and then talk about what part a resolver plays in the whole part, the world of GraphQL. So in a sense, we're going to demystify GraphQL a little bit, and then we'll write some real life examples live. So, and drop your comments and questions in the comments. Feel free. I'll be checking it here, periodically. So I love questions. So moving along. Oops. Just want to put an overview on. So GraphQL. So Dan Schaefer is one of the co-creators of GraphQL, and the way that he described what GraphQL was, quote, GraphQL is a query language for your API that shifts the contract between clients and servers that allows the server to say, these are the capabilities that I exposed, and allows the clients to describe their requirements in a way that ultimately empowers product developers to build the products they want to create. So it's a very complicated, it's pretty large, a little hefty description there, but I want to focus on GraphQL being a language. I think that's one of the most important foundational concepts is it's not technology specific. It's just a language, and it's used to describe data. So in my words, and also on the site, if you go to the GraphQL documentation, the idea is that you would just describe your data. So this is a type. We've got a project with a name, a tagline, contributors, and this is written with GraphQL. So that's a string type, and then that's an array of users. And then we just ask with a query. So this actually creates a schema. And then here we're going to have a little, we're going to have a query, and we're going to call it, and it's going to say we want a project with a name. We're giving it a parameter, and we get back tagline. So we always want to get what we're asking for. And that's where the power in GraphQL is. So we're just going to ask, and it gives us back exactly what we've asked for. So again, we describe our data structures. We ask for data we want, and then we get back predictable results. So I want to touch on philosophy a little bit. There's a couple main use cases that come with GraphQL. On one hand, you can be a backend team, and you want to create your new version of an API, and essentially you want to expose your backend resources. You just want to make it a GraphQL layer. And so that's one way, that's one use case. Another use case is a backend for a front end. So you're creating a new front end application. You want a layer between your data sources and your application, and so you create this layer backend for front end where the front end creates their schema for the backend to create resolvers for. So essentially, there's this question that comes. and it's who owns the schema, and so is it the backend team, is it the front end team, who decides what a query and a mutation look like? And it depends. In my opinion, it depends on the use case. So I would say number one in that use case, it's the backend team. There is no front end team that we're building for right now. So we're going to own the schema. We're going to create that to fit whatever resources we want to expose. And then the second use case would be the backend for the front end. And I think the front end team should own that schema. So they dictate what their data is going to look like. And so in both cases, the server still looks the same, the technology looks the same, whatever language you're using, but the way the project is created can be a little different. So kind of coming down and bringing it into what resolvers are specifically, Shopify describes a resolver in GraphQL as it's a field-specific function that hunts for the requested data in the server. The server processes the query, and the resolvers return data for each field until it has fetched all the data in the query. So in my summing it up, it's just a function, and it just gets the data for the query. So let's say we have a query that says I want a user, and we want the name and the ID. The resolver is the function that runs on the server that fulfills that request, and it returns the data in the structure of which the schema has dictated it should look like. So that's what the resolver part is, and that's what we're actually going to work on today. So we're going to create a little small GraphQL project and start writing some resolvers. And I wanted to ask if anybody has any questions at this point before I move over to the coding. And feel free to type as I move over. Okay. Well, if everyone understands GraphQL and resolvers, and I did a great job at explaining that, we'll move on into the code and we'll actually create some resolvers. So I'll just go ahead and start. And if we see any questions, I'll stop. So I'm going to talk about my project structure first, just to kind of describe what I'm doing here. So this is the JavaScript library for GraphQL. So it's just the basic JavaScript implementation of GraphQL. I don't have any bells and whistles, no Apollo server. We're not going to use GraphQL today. We're just going to do the bare bones function of GraphQL. So we're going to grab that out of here, and we're going to build a schema. Now I did grab the schema from a schema file. I like to do that. So this is where I generally start when we're building. So I'll say, okay, and we're going to use a backend for a front end example. So I use I let Pandora UI essentially inspire what this is going to look like. It's not complete. It's very basic, but it's a good little, example. So let's say I've got two queries. So let's say you navigate to Pandora, you have a user account, which we want to grab. Let's say they want to log in or whatever. I mean, in this case, it's just called user account. We're going to pass user ID, and we're going to get user back. We're going to send a dashboard. Another query is we're going to actually go to the dashboard screen. And so when we go to the dashboard screen, I want to get data for the dashboard screen. So I'm going to say we're going to pass in the user ID, and we expect a dashboard back. I did do a mutation as well. I want to do both queries and mutations. So we did a create user one, and it'll take a user input, which is a type here, and then it requires to have, and it requires to return a user object as well. So to confirm that it was created. Here's the input. It's got an ID, first name, last name, email is admin, and is a dark theme. And then we have a type user, which is ID, first name, last name, email, photo URL, is admin, is dark theme. So I'm going to just scroll down slowly and let you read the rest. But we have a dashboard. So that's returned on that query for dashboard, which is going to have a user. It's going to have collected songs and recently played songs. They're both just arrays of songs. So this is just want to throw something together. So we have the schema file, and that's what I went ahead and imported using a library called GraphQL import. I really like being able to import my schema from an actual GraphQL file. I do that also because I start another library called Code Generator is really handy. if you ever want to generate your hooks in React or generate your types in TypeScript, or there's plenty of other plugins for it, but it does it off of a GraphQL file. So I strongly suggest start using GraphQL files. And there's plenty of other ways to do this too. You can pull it in, but this is how I did it. And then I went ahead and just added it into the schema to build schema. So now we've got our schema, which we can actually feed to our GraphQL function. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to run a couple queries against it. We got the two queries. So we've got our dashboard query, we've got our user account query, and our create user mutation. And these are all from the schema right here. Now, obviously, they're not doing anything, but these are just the string that we're going to use to create what those queries are going to look like. And then we have our resolvers. There's nothing here yet. We haven't written any functions yet, but we're about to. And so once we do that, we'll call this function. We'll give it the schema. We'll give it whatever query we're calling, and we'll give it the resolver functions. So, of course, and then it returns a promise, and the result, we'll console log it out. Make sure we're getting what we're asking for. And then if there's any errors, we'll console error those out. So that's all we're going to do. The only dependencies I think for this project is GraphQL, and then I add a GraphQL import. So it's all very, very bare bones. All right. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write a query. I'm going to skip resolve. Well, actually, I'm going to write a resolver for the dashboard query first, or user account query. So I'm actually going to grab this and go ahead and write a resolver function for that. And you're going to get, I'm going to go ahead and bring this in over here, make it a little easier to see. We're going to go ahead and say user account, we're getting a user ID. And so we'll destructure that out of the arguments. And let's go ahead and give it something like a, I don't know, just like we'll just return an object. So what's it asking for? The user. So we need to make sure we return a user. So let's give it ID that we just gave. How about we give it the first name? How about Gene? Last name, Turner. Email, and Gene at turner.com. And admin can be a Boolean, so that's false. An admin is dark theme. I would say false. All right. So here's what I did. I created a function that returns this object. Okay. There's no data source right now. However, as far as resolvers go, again, this is all they are. They're just functions. So I'm just going to write a function that matches the name of this query. And now when this function gets called, whatever queries passed in, if it matches that function, if that query matches it'll grab a function that matches, and it'll run that function. And as long as it returns the correct object that's been described in the schema, it will return it no problem. And that's the job of a resolver. So we could put an HTTP request behind here. We can, they're great. Resolvers take async or not async. So they'll take a promise. So we can await any HTTP requests or file reads or anything. So, and it means it makes no difference. GraphQL handles it. So right now we're just going to return the object just to show that we can actually do it. So we can run this. It won't work because there's no query to call it yet. So we need to write a query for this. So we're going to do that in GraphQL. And this is the user account. So we'll say, hey, we want the user account. We're going to say the user ID is actually going to be 9. Doesn't really matter right now, but let's say that's the one. And we want to see back the ID, first name, last name, and is admin, and maybe a dark theme. Don't need the email right now. Well, we do, but so we've got our query here written, right, in GraphQL. We've got our schema being imported. So we've got that. We've got a resolver that matches the call, the actual query. So if we pass these in and actually call the function, we should get a result back that works. It should work and give us back this user. And so that's all GraphQL is. It's, as far as like with all the bells and whistles pulled off and all the, the whole stack pulled away, it's really just a function, and we're just going to call it, and we're going to get the data that we're trying to get. So let's take a look at this. And there you go. It worked. So it did work. We are successfully making the call, and the resolver is running just fine. So in a nutshell, this is all resolvers are. They're just functions that bring back data, and it's really that simple. So the good news is that anybody that's calling this GraphQL server, again, as you probably already know, as long as you describe your data correctly according to schema, we'll do all the magic here. So let's say, they're creating their dashboard query, right? And we're on the back-end team, and we're building their server, and we say, hey, what does your dashboard need to have? So they give us this right here. They say, hey, this is our dashboard query, and here's what it looks like. Okay, fine. So we need to make a resolver for that, okay? So let's say we have, let's say we have 2 different databases that we have to go to, because we have a dashboard as a user. So we have to go to the user database, or maybe Auth0 to get that token and all their credentials or whatever. We have to get their data from somewhere. That's not where we keep our song data, because maybe that's in a DynamoDB somewhere or something, or maybe some big data thing, or it's in a different data source. So we know that. The front end team doesn't care. They don't know. They just know that this is what they need. So we say, okay, that's fine. So we go ahead and write a resolver that's going to match this particular this query, the dashboard query. And we're going to get user input. And now we're going to give them back. Well, I'm actually going to open the function, and we're going to go ahead and we'll give back an object, and then we're going to do some abstracting. Because let's say we want to grab like data from a different database. I'll just show you instead. So let's see here. So what does the dashboard look like? Our user is a user, right? We've got our collected songs. And that's going to be an empty array. And we have our recently played. For the sake of not having a typo, and that's an empty array. So right now, this resolver does return a structure correctly. So we could run this, and it would come back fine. So we've mocked it out. Obviously, it's all empty. But if we threw a user in here, for example, maybe it's this user. Now the user data is coming back, right? So if we do have to create a query for this, though. So a dashboard query, very similar, right? It's just going to be the dashboard. And this would be coming from the front end. They would write their query. as well. So we would expect this to come from them. But in this case, we got user ID is 9, and we want to get back the user, and we want to get the ID. Excuse me, this is GraphQL, first name. Fun fact, these are filtered out. If you ever throw them in there, GraphQL will run it no problem. The spec accommodates for commas. So, or at least they said they do. I mean, okay. And we want the collected songs as well. We want from that what? Well, we are about, yeah, so we're going to get the collected songs. We want the artist. Just going to have a name, number of albums. And album name. And we don't need, let's skip this. Dashboard does need, and as you notice, I'm changing the order. As long as it's available, it'll reorder for us. We don't have to worry about that at all. So let's see, song name, artist, album name. Did I miss anything? If I did, you can mention it in the comments. But here we go. We've got a dashboard query, right? We say this is the data we want, okay? Now, this resolver should return this. So we actually should expect to get nulls for these, for collected songs. And I didn't put recently played songs, so I did miss that. So let me add that in. I believe it's this one, yep. Okay, well, here's a funny thing that we're running into right now, okay? So, and it's a good opportunity to go ahead and create one. So if anyone's not familiar with it yet, we're about to go ahead and create a fragment because I don't want to replicate, I don't want to rewrite this thing because they're both songs, collected songs and recently played songs are both we're gonna ask for the same thing. So I'm gonna copy this, do that. But that's a bit, yeah, we don't want to repeat code. So we're going to go ahead and create a fragment, song fields on song. Okay, and we'll go ahead and move these down. Oops. There we go. So we should be able to pull these out and should be able to pull those out to your song fields. So we don't have to worry about replicating this code. We include that. That's just part of what GraphQL does. It allows us to reuse pieces of a query or whatnot. So that's good to have. But because we're using we're not doing like an Apollo server or anything like that. We're not writing that once and persisting it somewhere. We're just throwing it into the function with everything else, with the schema. I'm sorry, with our query that, so there's other ways to do this with some other things that make it kind of easy, better to, like you wouldn't normally want to include a fragment with a query you're calling with, but we're doing that because we're using the library that you just call it and you're done. So let's see, let's go ahead and call the dashboard query. So the front end calls dashboard query and we give back some data. And let's see if it works. And it does not. So my fragment broke. It's okay. py fragment artist. We'll just do this. There we go. So So we're going to get back this. It works now. We've got our dashboard. We've got our collected songs that are empty. And there you go. So we have our dashboard coming. So what we would do is, in this case, cool thing about coming back into the resolver itself, right now we're just giving back dummy data. We're not connecting to anything. But the cool thing about this is, let's say this was somewhere else, and I wanted to await or make a call to some other function, right? And expect collected songs to come back. But then maybe this comes from a different function somewhere, like some other data store. The front end that's calling the resolver doesn't care. They don't need to know that. So we'll magically gather in this resolver. We can do anything we want in a resolver. We can read from a file. We can really do whatever. It's just a function. So in this example, we're doing simple responses and whatnot. We're trying to show, but you can get very complex with these. And the key is not to have it run very long, right? So you can do functions for every field as well, if you want. It's very helpful. You can format, etc. So in this case, we'll grab some collected songs from, I happen to have some already created, so we don't have to worry about writing them by hand. Here's some collected songs. It's actually a real artist. It's pretty good if you ever want to go look them up. And then recently played songs as well. Let's grab some of those. All right. Again, it's just seed data, right? So if I come in here and do this, we're just going to see it returned. It's working though. The resolver is doing its job. So half the battle, honestly, the heavy lifting is getting the wiring up and running. Once you have it all running like this, you can really take this and do anything you want. So it's getting a little bit congested in here. We have a lot going on. Maybe we want to call some other places, maybe some other functions to clean it up a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and abstract out this dashboard call. This function is going to actually call 3 other functions. We're going to call one for the user, for collected songs and recently played songs. And the way we're going to structure it is that we're going to treat them as data sources. So like, let's say this one's behind a SQL database. Okay, so I'm going to create a service of data sources, right? And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a pseudo, it's just I'm just going to create a function to kind of say, hey, we're actually going to a SQL DB. We're not going to, but it's just to show that. So we're going to go ahead and have our SQL DB, and we're going to call our user. So let's say I want to go to SQL and say, hey, well, give me an ID, and I'll go get this user from the SQL DB. Okay. Well, in this case, we're just going to give them this. So let me go ahead and give them that object. Make sure it matches up. So it masks. So now instead of us having to write it out like this, we're actually going to a repository or data source layer, whatever you want to call it. And I do have to, oh good, I already am exporting it. That's nice. I had that ready. Okay, let me import that in here. So we have it. All right, so we've got our data sources from our data sources file, and we're going to use it here. We're going to go to the SQL DB, and we're going to get our user, and we're going to give the user our user input. Okay, Okay. Did I call it user input for dashboard? No, I didn't. I call it user ID. Okay. So we're going to give it user ID. It'll call that. And now we've cleaned it up. I mean, we're still going to a mock data side, but for the resolver, it would never know. If I come back here and swap that out with an actual call, I mean, if I want to go ahead and say, we'll await it now, we'll go ahead and make this an async call. And if I can type correctly, we'll await it. Now, of course, we have to, at this point, go ahead and have it, resolve the promise back, and it should be fine. So now we can swap that with an HTTP request somewhere, or I'm sorry, a call to like a Postgres, whatever, to a database, and we can await the call, and no one's the wiser. So let's see, make sure this works. Yeah, so we're still good. And we've got the collected songs right. Oh, yeah, there's our dashboard. So we're getting it back. No issues. And now we want to pull this out as well. Maybe the songs are out of Dynamo. So maybe we go to a DynamoDB for the songs. I don't know. Let's see. Let's do our DynamoDB, and I'll go ahead and throw in our collected and recently played songs. Now. Right. So we've got a DynamoDB now. We've got our collected songs, which will return the mock data. And we've got our recently played songs as well. So if we come back here and we say instead of this, we want to go to the DynamoDB. Sources.dynamodb, and we want to get the collected songs. We just need to make sure we pass on that user ID, and we'll get those back. And then we have our other data source right here. And also in Dynamo. I did it uppercase for some reason. Okay. So make these lowercase to be more conventional. Not that I did that. I'm not sure why, but it's all right. So we'll make sure everything's okay. I always like to run it over and over again and make sure everything's working as it should when I make changes like this. So far, so good. So we're now going to the data sources, and here we are. So we could swap this out with any data source, doesn't matter at all. And we just call what we need and we return it in the right structure and we're good to go. So those are queries. We've got two resolvers running, user account. We've got ourselves a dashboard. For sake of just simplicity, I'm going to take out the async and wait because we're not. This is not a. This function is not doesn't need to be async right now. We're not awaiting any. We don't need any promises. So right now we're good to go. However, mutation. We want to create a user. So far, how are we doing? Any questions? I don't see any. Okay. We'll move on. We'll move on to our mutation. So far we've done two queries. We've built the resolvers for them, and we've also written the queries for them. We created Fragment so that we could not replicate our code when we looked for the songs. And we're about to create our mutations at this point. So what does a mutation look like? How do we want to do this? We want to create a user. So we're going to go ahead and call mutate. We're going to say this is a mutation. We're going to create user to match. We're going to give it user input. And this type is going to be right here. So we're going to create that. And for sake, well, we're going to create one with an ID of 8. First name is going to be Josh. Notice I don't have to use commas because this is still GraphQL. It looks like a JSON object, but it is, and it basically is, but we get to not have to use commas because technically we're in GraphQL. So I'm going to go ahead and say this dot.co. And I am an admin, so I'm going to go ahead and say yes. And I do like the dark theme, as you all can see. So we'll do true. And don't forget, we get returned our user for confirmation. This is just a convention in general when you create, update, or do any mutations on a user or any object. Generally speaking, you'll get that same one back to confirm that it's actually done. And then you can also update your state generally. So it's usually good to get it back. Either that or confirm the updated state that was, optimistically updated. But so we'll get the ID, we'll get first name, we'll do last name, email is admin, and is dark theme. So we're just going to say, yes, we did it. We got this to work. So we're going to call that. Now there's no resolver yet. So there's no function here. So nothing would happen right now. We get a big fat error, probably. Actually, it'd be kind of cool to see what that error looks like. So let's go ahead, and we've done everything. There's no resolver. So we're trying to call a mutation that it's looking for it, create user, and there's no resolver for it. So it just doesn't, it's not happy. Essentially, it's just upset that we're not returning anything, which is kind of funny. But I guess because the schema does say, it exists, the mutation is there, we're calling it, we're just not returning anything from the resolvers. So let's create a resolver for it. Let's get this thing working. So as you know, without a resolver, GraphQL breaks. There's no way for it to work, right? This is where this is the core of it. This is one of the really main, I don't want to say most important because it's not true, but it's just part of the pipeline. You have to know how to use it. So let's create our user. And we will use our new data source. So let's go ahead and do that. And let's say we want data sources, and we're going to create it in our SQL DB, right? So let's say there's a create user function. That's lowercase because and we're going to send our user ID. And so what we should be getting back, so this would be going to some database in SQL. It would create the user and it would return the user saying, yay, it worked. In reality, we don't even have the function yet for it, but we're going to create one. So create user, and this function is really just going to take the ID and again return the same object that was brought to us. There's nothing really happening. So I believe we can, I'm not going to write that out. Oh, right. That's right, it's not ID, pardon me, it's the actual user. Because remember we said, hey, it's user input. So that's not what's coming in. So what's coming in is a user input. That's going to have all this. So we'll send that in, and then this will come in. So well, we can call user. We'll just return the user. I'm not really doing anything with it yet. So we're just going to return it. So we're going to go ahead and, grab it from the SQL, create it. What we would be doing is we would have a try catch. We would go connect to a SQL. We'd await it. We'd make sure it works, and we'd send it back. And if we have an error, we'd throw it. But there is no SQL database behind us right now. So just to show that the resolver works, We are now getting that data back. So mutations, queries, essentially from a resolver's perspective, it doesn't matter what it is. There are frameworks that will build on top of these foundations, and you will have other options. Apollo Server provides a lot of help. Apollo Server provides things like context and the request object and the response object, and it also has a data source layer that you can use. So there's a lot of things you can add to it. So it gives you a lot more control with what resolvers can do. It just enhances what you can do. But from a very basic perspective, you can successfully write a server with just what we've done here. Well, grab an Express server and wrap it. The Express has plugins to be able to use with GraphQL very, very easily. So you can create a server very quickly. If you want to just have, a way that I would recommend doing a server would be doing that. Use the Express module for it rather than just write an Express app and then import and do it yourself like this. It's just helpful. There's not as much code. It makes it easier. But essentially, this is all you need. At this point, we can create a server and have this is all we need right here. So there's no questions. So let's see. I want to go over everything one more time. I don't want to be redundant. So, okay. So overall, we've got ourselves a small little GraphQL server script here that's going to run various queries that we wrote off of this schema that's provided here by the front end, right, of the Pandora UI team. And this is what they want. And we've created 2 resolvers and a mutation to accommodate what they're asking for. Now, from here, they have everything they need. Now, at this point, we could just create, as we need to create the backend for this. They don't need anything from, they're not dependent on that. They have the responses they need. So I'm not going to go too deep into all that. But anyhow, hopefully this was helpful and enjoyable. And if there aren't any questions, I think I'll pass this back off to you, Sarah.
Great. Josh, thank you so much for such a great presentation. We really appreciate it. If there aren't any more questions at this point, we will sign off for today. If you do have questions in the future, go ahead and get a hold of Josh on Twitter. You can also continue the conversation here. And again, we will be back in December. So stay tuned on javascriptmarathon.com for more information on our next sessions. And have a wonderful day wherever you are. We appreciate you tuning in. We'll see you soon.